The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Air America Flight 247, illuminating the first-class cabin where Vice President Marina Chin settled into her seat. Her security detail had boarded first, establishing protective perimeter that had become second nature during her 3 years serving as the first Asian American woman to hold the office. The flight from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco represented a rare moment of relative solitude. 6 hours where the constant demands of governance gave way to the simple hum of jet engines and the promise of seeing her family waiting at the terminal. "Just water for now. Thank you," the vice president told a young flight attendant who greeted her with professional courtesy. She opened her leather portfolio, reviewing notes for the Environmental Justice Conference she would keynote the following morning. The portfolios were her trademark, analog in a digital world, filled with handwritten observations and the stories of everyday citizens she'd met across the country. 3 rows behind the vice president, Elaine Winters adjusted her uniform and watched with narrowed eyes. A 20-year veteran of the airline industry, Elaine had requested this specific flight when she'd heard who would be on board. For months, she had been stewing over the vice president's recent policy announcements, particularly the immigration reform package that conservative media personalities had decried as opening the floodgates and erasing American identity. "Coffee, sir?" Elaine asked the businessman, her voice pleasant but her movements mechanical as she mentally rehearsed what she planned to say. She had joined several online groups over the past year, where members shared concerns about the changing face of America and traditional values under attack. What had begun as legitimate policy disagreements had gradually transformed into something darker, fertilized by algorithm-driven content that fed her existing anxieties and painted complex issues in stark, threatening terms. The vice president's presence on this flight felt like an opportunity, a divine sign, even that she shouldn't waste. Someone needed to stand up and speak truth to power. Someone needed to be brave enough to say what real Americans were thinking. "Elaine, can you cover rows 4 through 6? We're short on cranberry juice in my cart," called Marcus, the lead flight attendant, interrupting her thoughts. "Of course," she replied, moving her cart forward. This meant she would serve the vice president directly. The cabin had reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt signs dimmed. Secret Service agents remained vigilant, but relaxed into the routine of air travel. Vice President Chun had exchanged her jacket for a cardigan and was deeply engrossed in constituent letters. "Beverage service," Elaine announced as she reached the vice president's row. Her heart hammered against her ribs, palms suddenly damp. The vice president looked up with a warm smile. "Just water is fine, thank you." Something about the smile, its genuine quality, perhaps momentarily disarmed Elaine. But then she remembered a meme she'd seen depicting the vice president as a foreign agent, and her resolve hardened. "Actually," Elaine said, her voice louder than necessary, "I have something to say to you." The Secret Service agents immediately tensed. One moved his hand toward his earpiece, while another shifted slightly forward. "People like you are destroying what makes this country great," Elaine continued, color rising in her cheeks. "You people come here and change everything. My grandfather fought in World War II for an America you're trying to erase." The cabin fell silent. Passengers turned in their seats, some reaching for phones. A child whispered an anxious question to her mother. Vice President Chin remained still, her expression shifting from surprise to something more measured, a look cultivated through decades of navigating spaces where her presence was seen as an intrusion rather than a right. "Ma'am," one of the agents said firmly, "step back from the vice president immediately." "No," Elaine said, her voice trembling now with both anger and fear. "Someone needs to tell her what real Americans think about her policies. You're not even really American. You just want to bring in more people who look like you and vote for you." Marcus appeared at Elaine's side, his face ashen. "Elaine, that's enough. Come with me right now." "Do you know what they're doing to this country?" Elaine demanded. Ignoring him as years of accumulated grievance and misinformation found their target. "They're replacing us. They're..." Ms. Winters. The vice president's voice cut through Elaine's tirade, measured and unexpectedly gentle. I'd like to speak with you. The Secret Service agents exchanged alarmed glances, but the vice president raised her hand slightly, a practiced gesture requesting space. That's not protocol, Madam Vice President, the lead agent murmured. Noted, she replied quietly, but I'd like a moment. Elaine stood frozen, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't how she had imagined the confrontation unfolding. She had expected outrage, defensiveness, maybe even fear, not this calm request for dialogue. Your grandfather served in World War II? The vice president asked. The question caught Elaine off guard. Yes, 101st Airborne. He jumped into Normandy. The vice president nodded. Mine was in the 442nd Infantry Regiment, all Japanese Americans. Most came straight from internment camps where their families remained imprisoned. They became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history for their size and length of service. Elaine blinked rapidly. The carefully constructed narrative she built suddenly confronted with an inconvenient complexity. I carry his Purple Heart with me, the vice president continued, reaching into her portfolio and carefully extracting a small velvet pouch. Not as vice president, but as his granddaughter. Every policy decision I make, I ask myself if it honors his sacrifice, if it builds a kind of nation worth dying for. The cabin remained utterly silent. Passengers who had been filming lowered their phones, suddenly uncomfortable with capturing something so unexpectedly intimate. My grandfather couldn't buy a house when he came back, the vice president continued. Couldn't eat in certain restaurants despite his uniform. Couldn't vote in some states. The America he fought for was a promise, not yet fulfilled. That's what I work for every day, fulfilling that promise for all Americans. Elaine's hands gripped the beverage cart, so tightly her knuckles whitened. But the borders, the changes, everything happening so fast. Change is frightening, the vice president acknowledged. I understand that fear. But America isn't great because we stayed the same. We're great because we continuously expand our understanding of who we the people includes. Marcus gently placed his hand on Elaine's shoulder. We need to continue service. And there will be consequences for this, Elaine. There should be, the vice president said firmly. What happened here isn't acceptable. But, she looked directly at Elaine, if you're willing, I'd like to continue this conversation. Not here, not now, but my office can arrange it. Because the divide we're experiencing comes partly from not truly seeing each other as fellow Americans, despite our differences. Elaine was led away, her world spinning. She had come armed with certainty and found herself disarmed by complexity. As Marcus guided her to the back galley, passengers began murmuring, some openly weeping, others frantically typing on their phones. What none of them realized in that moment was how quickly this interaction would spread beyond the confines of Flight 247, becoming a flashpoint in the national conversation about identity, belonging, and what it truly means to be American. By the time Flight 247 touched down in San Francisco, video clips of the confrontation had already begun their viral journey across social media platforms. Initial uploads came with provocative captions. VP Chin destroyed by brave flight attendant on some channels. Racist flight attendant confronts VP. What happens next will move you on others. The algorithm-driven ecosystem of content immediately sorted viewers into their respective information bubbles, each seeing a version of events that confirmed their existing worldviews. But something unusual was happening. The full 7-minute video, captured by college student Zoe Washington from Tubi, resisted easy categorization. It showed not just confrontation but connection, not just division but its possible bridging. Most surprising to viewers across the political spectrum was the vice president's response. Neither the rehearsed deflection they expected from a politician, nor the outrage that would have made for more sensational viewing. In the cramped administrative offices of Air America's San Francisco airport hub, Elaine Winters sat rigid in an uncomfortable chair, her career imploding around her. The airline's regional director and head of HR had been clear. Her actions constituted grounds for immediate termination. 23 years, Elaine whispered, staring at her hands. I've given this airline 23 years. Which makes your behavior even more incomprehensible. The HR director replied, sliding the termination papers across the desk. "We can't have employees verbally assaulting passengers. Any passenger, let alone the Vice President of the United States." Marcus, who had been asked to provide a statement, watched his longtime colleague with complex emotions. "Elaine," he said gently, "I've flown with you for 15 years. This isn't you, or at least, it didn't used to be." "You don't understand," she replied, voice hollow. "None of you understand what's happening to this country." "Perhaps not," a new voice said from the doorway. They all turned to find Layla Martinez, the Vice President's Chief of Staff, standing with a small security detail. The airline executives immediately stood, straightening their jackets. "Ms. Martinez, we want to assure you that Air America takes this incident with the utmost seriousness," the regional director began. Martinez raised her hand. "The Vice President has asked me to convey that she doesn't wish to see Ms. Winters terminated." A stunned silence filled the room. "With all due respect," the HR director finally managed, "company policy is very clear regarding passenger harassment, and given the circumstances—" "The Vice President understands your position," Martinez interrupted. "She's not asking you to violate company policies. She's suggesting an alternative approach, if Ms. Winters is willing." She turned to Elaine. "The Vice President meant what she said about continuing the conversation. She's proposing that instead of termination, you might consider a 6-month reassignment to the Bridging Divides initiative." "The what?" Elaine asked, confusion momentarily displacing her despair. "It's a bipartisan program that brings Americans from different backgrounds together to work on community service projects," Martinez explained. "The Vice President helped establish it 2 years ago. Participation would include diversity training, community service, and reconciliation workshops. After successful completion, Air America would have the option to reinstate you, perhaps in a different capacity." The executives exchanged bewildered glances. This was unprecedented. Why would she do this? Elaine asked suspiciously, "Is this some kind of publicity stunt?" Martinez's expression remained neutral, but her eyes reflected a deeper understanding. "The Vice President believes that what happened on that flight is a symptom of something much larger than one person or one incident. She sees an opportunity here, not for punishment, but for growth, for connection, and perhaps for healing something broken in our national conversation." Outside the office, the Vice President's motorcade navigated San Francisco streets toward her sister's home in the Sunset District. Chin scrolled through message notifications on her secure phone, the digital aftermath of the incident multiplying exponentially. Her press secretary had already fielded calls from every major network. "We should release a statement," her communications director insisted from the seat beside her. "Frame the narrative before others do it for us." "Not yet," the Vice President replied. "I want to wait until we hear from Ms. Winters. This isn't about scoring political points. With respect, Madam Vice President, everything is about scoring political points these days. Your opponents are already spinning this. Senator Blackwell just tweeted that you're playing the victim, while simultaneously threatening an American worker who spoke her mind." The Vice President sighed, gazing out the window at the city she'd once called home. "Do you know what my grandmother told me when I faced discrimination in school? She said, 'Remember that hate is often just fear wearing a mask. See the fear and you might find a way through.' That's beautiful, ma'am, but I saw fear today, not hate," she continued. "Fear of change, fear of loss, fear of a future that looks different from the past. That fear is real, even when it manifests as something ugly." She turned to her aide. "If we keep responding to fear with condemnation alone, we'll never break this cycle." Back at the airport, Elaine sat alone in a quiet room, staring at the business card Layla Martinez had left behind. The past few hours had shattered her certainty, leaving sharp fragments of confusion in its place. She had boarded that flight burning with righteous anger, certain she was speaking for millions. Now she felt oddly hollow, her conviction punctured by the unexpected grace of the woman she had attacked. Her phone buzzed continuously. Family members, colleagues, even journalists somehow already had her number. One text from her 20-year-old daughter particularly stung. "Mom, there's a video. Tell me that's not really you saying those things. Across the country, in living rooms and break rooms, on campuses and in corporate offices, people watch the viral clips with their own biases coloring their perceptions. Yet, something about this particular incident cut through the usual noise. The unexpected response from the vice president, the quiet dignity, the refusal to escalate, the sharing of personal history, disrupted the familiar script of political theater. Dr. Aisha Karim, professor of media and social psychology at Georgetown, explained the phenomenon to a CNN panel that evening. What we're witnessing is a pattern interruption. Our brains are primed for conflict, especially in political contexts. When someone responds with unexpected nuance or humanity, it creates cognitive dissonance. That dissonance can be uncomfortable, but it also creates space for new thinking. By evening, the hashtag Dignity Takes Flight was trending, with Americans sharing stories of moments when grace had transformed conflict in their own lives. Community dialogue sprang up, some organized by faith groups, others by civic organizations. A surprising coalition of voices from across the political spectrum called for using the incident as a catalyst for deeper conversation about national identity and belonging. In her sister's cozy home, surrounded by family for the first time in months, Vice President Chin fielded a call from the president. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest, Marina," he said. "The footage is everywhere. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, sir. More concerned about how this incident might be weaponized. Our strategists are divided. Some think this could be a defining moment for the administration. Others worry it distracts from our policy agenda." The vice president watched her nieces playing chess in the corner, their faces intense with concentration. "With respect, sir, I think both perspectives missed the point. This isn't about political strategy. It's about who we are as a country, about whether we can still see each other's humanity across our deepest divides." "Noble sentiments," the president replied, "but we're facing midterms in an incredibly polarized environment. Every moment like this is immediately politicized." "Then perhaps we need more such moments, not fewer," she answered quietly. "Moments that remind us we're neighbors and family members before we're political opponents." After the call ended, the vice president joined her sister in the kitchen, gratefully accepting a cup of tea. "You always were the optimist in the family," her sister observed, having overheard portions of the conversation. "Do you really believe one incident on a plane can make any difference in this climate?" The vice president considered the question carefully. "By itself? No. But what if it's not just one incident? What if it becomes permission for a different kind of engagement? The problem with polarization isn't just that we disagree. It's that we've stopped believing in the possibility of genuine connection across those disagreements." Her phone buzzed with a message from Layla Martinez. "Winters has agreed to the program. Starts next week." The vice president smiled slightly, feeling the first hint of possibility. Sometimes transformation began not with grand policy initiatives, but with individual hearts and minds encountering each other in unexpected ways. What neither she nor Elaine Winters could possibly anticipate was how their brief interaction at 30,000 feet would catalyze a movement that would transcend them both, creating ripples of change that would reach far beyond that single flight. The community center in East Oakland bustled with activity as Elaine Winters stepped through its doors, clutching the folder containing her Bridging Divides initiative orientation materials. Sunlight streamed through large windows illuminating walls adorned with community artwork, vibrant murals depicting interconnected hands, neighborhood landmarks, and the faces of local heroes who had fought for justice across generations. Ms. Winters, a tall black woman with silver locks, approached, hand extended. "I'm Dr. Janelle Richardson, Program Coordinator. Welcome to Franklin Community Center." Elaine shook her hand hesitantly. After 3 weeks of mandatory paid leave and intensive counseling sessions, this was her first day in the 6-month program that stood between her and unemployment. The airline had been surprisingly supportive once the vice president's office became involved, but Elaine still felt adrift, caught between embarrassment over her viral notoriety and lingering resentment that her concerns had been reduced to mere racism by media commentators who knew nothing about her life. "The others are gathering in the circle room," Dr. Richardson continued, seemingly unperturbed by Elaine's reticence. "We have 12 participants in this cohort. people from remarkably different walks of life. Do they know who I am? Elaine asked, the question that had haunted her for weeks. Dr. Richardson's eyes reflected compassion without pity. They know everyone here has a storied division and a desire for something different. The specifics are yours to share when and if you choose. The circle room turned out to be a sunlit space with comfortable chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Elaine scanned the faces of her fellow participants. A young man with tattoos covering his arms, an elderly woman in a hijab, a middle-aged man in a wheelchair, a couple wearing matching evangelical church t-shirts, and others representing the kaleidoscopic diversity of America. Some chatted easily, others sat in silence, seeming as apprehensive as she felt. Before we begin, Dr. Richardson announced once everyone had settled, I want to acknowledge that being here requires courage. Each of you has experienced or perpetuated division in some way. Each of you has chosen to step toward understanding rather than away from it. That choice alone deserves recognition. Elaine studied her hands, uncomfortable with the implicit praise. She hadn't chosen this. It had been this or unemployment. Yet something about Dr. Richardson's words resonated with a deeper truth. She could have refused the program, accepted termination, and retreated further into the echo chamber that had nourished her grievances. Something had made her take this path instead. We'll start with a simple exercise, Dr. Richardson continued. Please share your name and one thing you love about the place you call home. Not your political affiliation, not your job, not your stance on issues. Just something you cherish about your community. The tattooed young man began. I'm Miguel. I love how the abuelas in my neighborhood still bring food to new families who move in, no questions asked. Been happening since before I was born. They continued around the circle. The elderly woman loved the community garden her mosque had built with a synagogue next door. The evangelical couple loved their church's annual cleanup day at the local elementary school. A former police officer loved coaching Little League in the same neighborhood he once patrolled. When her turn came, Elaine hesitated. I'm Elaine. I love... She thought of her suburban neighborhood. Search for something meaningful beyond property values. I love that the neighbors still check on my mother when I'm flying. She's 86, and someone always shovels her walk in winter without being asked. Dr. Richardson nodded encouragingly. Communities care for their vulnerable in specific ways. That's a thread we share across many differences. The first week passed in a blur of structured dialogues, community service projects, and uncomfortable moments of self-reflection. Elaine kept largely to herself, participating minimally and returning each evening to her small apartment to field concerned calls from her sister in Ohio, who couldn't understand why Elaine had taken the VP's offer instead of suing the airline for religious discrimination. It's not that simple, Karen. Elaine tried to explain during one such call. And it was a religious discrimination. I said things I shouldn't have said. Since when? You've been saying the same thing for years at Thanksgiving, and nobody fired you, her sister retorted. The comment landed like a stone in Elaine's stomach. Was that true? Had she been carrying these thoughts for so long they become invisible to her, like glasses perched on her nose? By the second week, the group had begun working on their community impact project, transforming an abandoned lot into a neighborhood gathering space with gardens, benches, and a small playground. The work was physical and immediately rewarding in a way Elaine had forgotten existed. After years of serving drinks at 30,000 feet, there was something profoundly grounding about digging in actual earth, seeing immediate results from her labor. It was during a water break that Miguel approached her, offering a bandana to wipe her sweat-streaked face. You're the lady from the plane, right? With the vice president? He asked without preamble. Elaine froze, the familiar shame washing over her. Yes, she admitted, bracing for judgment. Miguel nodded thoughtfully. My abuela saw that video and said something I can't forget. She said, that woman is carrying fear so heavy she can't stand straight under it. Elaine blinked, unprepared for this perspective. I was angry at first, watching that clip. Miguel continued. Reminded me of teachers who assumed I couldn't read English because of my last name. But then I saw how you looked when the VP showed you her grandfather's Purple Heart, and I recognized that look. It's the same one I had when I learned the history they never taught us in school the complicated, messy truth of how we all got here. Before Elaine could respond, Dr. Richardson called the group back to work. But the interaction lingered, prompting Elaine to really look at her fellow participants for the first time, to wonder about their stories, their fears, their complicated journeys to the shared space. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., Vice President Chin navigated the political aftermath of what media outlets had dubbed the Flight 247 moment. Policy advisors had initially feared the incident would derail focus from the administration's legislative agenda. Instead, it had created unexpected openings for conversation around the very policies the vice president championed. The polling is fascinating, her data analyst explained during a strategy meeting. Among independents who saw the unedited footage, support for the immigration reform package has increased 12 points. They're connecting your personal story, your grandfather's service despite facing discrimination, with a larger narrative about American identity. It shouldn't take a viral moment of racism for people to see the humanity in policy, the vice president observed, but I'll take progress however it comes. Her senior advisor nodded. The Bridging Divides initiative has received over 2,000 new applications since the incident. People are looking for spaces to have these conversations. After the meeting, the vice president found herself alone in her office, contemplating a framed photograph of her grandparents standing proudly before their small grocery store, the business they built after years of saving, despite banks refusing them loans. She thought of Elaine Winters, wondering how the flight attendant was faring in the program. She reached for her phone and called Layla Martinez. Any updates on the Winters situation? She's completing the third week of the program. Dr. Richardson reports she's quiet, but engaged. No issues so far. Any other matter we discussed? Scheduled for next month, assuming she's receptive. The program directors think it's still too soon. The vice president nodded. They know best. Keep me updated. Back in Oakland, Elaine found herself staying late at the community center, helping Miguel and Sarah, the woman in hijab, finish painting benches for the community space. Their easy conversation about grandchildren and cooking traditions had drawn her in, and for the first time in months, she felt the knot in her chest loosening slightly. My mosque is hosting an interfaith dinner next week, Sarah mentioned as they cleaned brushes. Nothing political, just breaking bread together. You will be welcome. The invitation startled Elaine. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Sarah smiled gently. Because you're worried people will recognize you, or because you've never been in a mosque? Both, I suppose, Elaine admitted. Being afraid of unfamiliar spaces is human, Sarah said. I was terrified the first time I attended a city council meeting after moving here. I was certain everyone would stare at my hijab, that I wouldn't belong. Some did stare, but others made space. That's how community works, always this dance between exclusion and welcome. On her drive home, Elaine found herself taking a detour past her childhood neighborhood, a once thriving area where her father had worked at the now-shuttered manufacturing plant. The economic decline had coincided with demographic changes, and her family had been among the last white families to leave when she was 15. In her mind, these facts had always been causally connected. The neighborhood's decline a direct result of its changing composition. But now, seeing the area through older eyes, more complex questions emerged. What economic forces had really closed the plant? What policies had shaped which neighborhoods received investment and which were left to decline? Had her family's departure contributed to the cycle of disinvestment rather than being merely a response to it? These uncomfortable questions followed her home, where she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, actual research beyond her usual media sources. She stayed up until 2 a.m. reading about redlining, manufacturing decline, and economic transitions in her region. Her flight attendant's habit of thoroughness now turned toward understanding rather than confirming existing beliefs. The next morning, exhausted but strangely energized, she made a decision. She texted Sarah, I'd like to attend the dinner if the invitation still stands. And I have some questions, if you're willing to talk. As the fourth week of the program began, Dr. Richardson noticed a shift in Elaine, a new attentiveness in her posture, an occasional willingness to share perspectives. During a group reflection, Elaine surprised everyone by speaking up. I've been thinking about belonging, she said hesitantly. About who gets to feel at home in America and who doesn't. I always thought that was a zero-sum game, that someone else's belongings somehow threatened mine. I'm not sure anymore. Dr. Richardson nodded encouragingly. That's a profound insight, Elaine. Would you be willing to explore that further? I'm trying, Elaine replied, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. I'm really trying. What no one in the room knew was that back in Washington, plans were being finalized for a conversation that would test both Elaine's emerging insights and the vice president's conviction that bridging divides require more than pleasant platitudes. It demanded the courage to face one another across the chasms that had come to define American life. Morning light filtered through the East Room windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the polished floor. White House staff made final adjustments to the simple staging. 2 comfortable chairs angled toward each other, microphones positioned discreetly, lighting adjusted to create an atmosphere of intimacy rather than spectacle. Today's conversation would be live-streamed across multiple platforms, but the setting deliberately evoked a living room rather than a formal political venue. In a small anteroom, Elaine Winters smoothed her navy pantsuit, purchased for the occasion, and tried to steady her breathing. 3 months had passed since she'd begun the Bridging Divides initiative. 3 months of community service, difficult conversations, and increasingly profound self-examination. When Dr. Richardson had approached her about the vice president's request for this public dialogue, Elaine's first instinct had been immediate refusal. The thought of facing the woman she confronted, this time before a national audience, filled her with dread. This isn't about public shaming or performative reconciliation, Dr. Richardson had assured her. The vice president is suggesting a genuine conversation about the journey you've both been on since that flight, about what it might teach us about bridging the divides in our country. Now, waiting to be called into the East Room, Elaine's thoughts drifted to the interfaith dinner she'd attended at Sarah's mosque. She remembered her surprise at being welcomed without judgment, the gentle questions about her work, her family, her hopes, human conversations that never veered into political territory yet somehow laid groundwork for deeper understanding. She thought of Miguel teaching her Spanish phrases as they installed playground equipment, of the former police officer sharing vulnerabilities about his struggles to reconnect with the community he'd once patrolled. These relationships had gradually become anchors in her life, creating space for questions she'd never allowed herself to ask. What if the changes happening in America weren't threats to be resisted, but transformations to be navigated together? What if belonging wasn't finite, but infinitely expandable? A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Layla Martinez entered, professional but warm. "It's time, Ms. Winters. Are you ready?" Elaine nodded, gathering her courage. "As ready as I'll ever be." Meanwhile, Vice President Chun reviewed her notes one final time, uncomfortably aware of her communications team's anxiety about this unprecedented event. Since announcing the conversation, critics had attacked from all sides. Conservatives accusing her of exploiting the incident for political gain. Progressives questioning whether giving Elaine a platform normalized racist behavior. Several senior advisors had suggested canceling, concern about potential disaster if things went poorly. "This isn't political strategy," she had insisted. "It's human connection with political implications. There's a difference." Now, slipping her grandfather's Purple Heart into her pocket, a private talisman rather than a prop, she silently reaffirmed her purpose. This conversation wasn't about her personal vindication or Elaine's public redemption. It was about making visible a process normally hidden from view, the messy, imperfect work of confronting biases and finding connection across profound divides. As cameras went live, the vice president entered the East Room from one door, Elaine from another. Their handshake was brief but genuine before they took their seats, facing not only each other but an audience representing the nation's multifaceted identity. "Thank you for joining me today, Ms. Winters," the vice president began, her voice steady. "Thank you for the invitation, Madam Vice President," Elaine replied, her nervousness evident but controlled. "I think it's important we acknowledge the circumstances that brought us here," the vice president continued. 3 months ago, we had an interaction on Flight 247 that neither of us anticipated would become part of the national conversation. Would you be comfortable sharing what was going through your mind that day?" Elaine took a deep breath. I boarded that flight believing I was standing up for something important, for an America I feared was disappearing. I had convinced myself that people like you, she paused, recalibrating, that certain policies were threatening everything I valued. I felt righteous in my anger. What did you believe was being threatened? The vice president asked, leaning slightly forward, genuinely curious. My sense of place in this country, Elaine admitted. My belonging. My identity as an American. I'd come to believe that expanding who we include somehow diminished what America means. That sounds hollow now, saying it aloud. It doesn't sound hollow, the vice president countered gently. Fear of loss is profoundly human. What's changed in your perspective since then? Elaine considered the question carefully. I'd begun to understand that my fear wasn't just about cultural changes. It was rooted in economic insecurity, in watching my father's factory close, my childhood neighborhood decline, opportunities disappear. I directed that anxiety toward people who looked different from me rather than examining the policies and systems that shaped those outcomes. She paused, gathering courage for her next words. The program connected me with people whose families faced barriers mine never did, redlining, discrimination, immigration challenges, yet who still believe in this country's promise. Their resilience has made me question the narrowness of my previous understanding. The vice president nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather used to say that America isn't a finished product, but a continuous conversation about who we are becoming together. That conversation requires all voices, including those expressing anxiety about change, but not expressing it through racism. Elaine added firmly, surprising both herself and the audience with her directness. I need to acknowledge that what I said on that plane was racist, regardless of my intentions or underlying fears. That recognition has been painful but necessary. A murmur rippled through the audience, this unequivocal acknowledgement breaking from the usual script of deflection or qualification. Recognition is an important first step, the vice president affirmed. But where do we go from there as a society? How do we move beyond acknowledging division toward actively building connection? Their conversation unfolded over the next hour, traversing personal experiences and broader social terrain. The economic anxieties of communities like Elaine's, the barriers faced by communities of color, the manipulation of legitimate concerns into racial resentment, and the transformative power of structured dialogue across difference. Most striking to viewers was the absence of rehearsed talking points or performative agreement. Both women spoke from authentic experience, neither pretending their fundamental perspectives had fully converged. Yet they demonstrated something more powerful, the capacity to recognize each other's humanity while addressing real disagreements. When a question came about immigration policy, the very issue that had initially fueled Elaine's anger, she didn't suddenly parrot the vice president's position. Instead, she offered a more nuanced perspective than she'd held 3 months earlier. I still have concerns about security and economic impacts, she acknowledged, but I've learned that immigrants contribute enormously to our country's vitality. The family that runs the corner store where we buy materials for our community garden, they work harder than anyone I know, supporting relatives here and sending money home. Their belonging doesn't threaten mine. As the conversation concluded, the vice president asked one final question. What would you want other Americans to take from your experience, Ms. Winters? Elaine considered carefully. That division isn't our inevitable fate, that it's possible to question our own certainties, that people aren't simply good or bad. We're all capable of harm and healing. She paused, finding words for something still taking shape within her. And that true patriotism might not be about defending America as it was, but building America as it could be, a place where everyone's dignity remains intact, even across our deepest differences. The vice president nodded, reaching into her pocket to extract her grandfather's Purple Heart. She didn't display it to the cameras this time, but simply held it in her palm as she delivered her closing thoughts. My grandfather fought for an America that didn't yet fully exist, one that hadn't yet recognized its full humanity or rights. That takes a particular kind of faith, to fight for a promise not yet fulfilled, a belonging not yet granted. Today, we all face a similar challenge. Can we believe in and build an America big enough for all our stories? Can we expand our understanding of we the people without losing what binds us together? As the live stream concluded, social media erupted with reactions spanning the political spectrum. But something unprecedented was happening in comment sections and living rooms across the country. The conversation had modeled a different way of engaging across divides, one that neither minimized real differences nor surrendered to cynical polarization. In community centers, houses of worship, and college campuses, people began organizing their own dialogues inspired by what they'd witnessed. Conservative religious groups and progressive activist organizations found themselves drawing on the same framework, adapting the Bridging Divides initiative methodology to their specific communities. 6 months later, Elaine returned to Air America, not in her previous role, but in a newly created position focused on diversity education for airline staff. The position had emerged from her own proposal, developed during the final phase of the program, which advocated for industry-wide training on serving diverse passenger populations with dignity and cultural awareness. On her first day back, she found Marcus waiting in the staff room, a hesitant smile on his face. "Welcome back, Elaine," he said, extending his hand. "Things are different now." "I'm different now," she replied, accepting the gesture. Not finished growing, but different. As they walked together toward her first training session, Elaine noticed a framed photograph on the wall, one she'd never paid attention to before. It showed an early Air America crew from the 1960s, including the airline's first black flight attendants hired after civil rights legislation forced change in industry practices. "They faced so much resistance," Marcus commented, following her gaze. "Passengers refusing to be served by them, colleagues undermining them, but they showed up anyway, changing the airline through their presence." Elaine studied their faces, the dignified determination evident in their postures, the cost of their courage invisible but surely immense. She thought of Vice President Chen's grandfather fighting for a country that hadn't yet made space for him, of Sarah praying in a country that often viewed her faith with suspicion, of Miguel creating community in neighborhoods others had abandoned. These thoughts accompanied her into the training room, where she faced her first group of colleagues, some curious, some skeptical, all watching to see whether her transformation was genuine or merely performance. Taking a deep breath, she began not with policy or procedure, but with an invitation. "Before we discuss protocols and practices, I'd like to start with a question. What's one thing you love about the community you call home?" Across the country, in ways large and small, similar conversations were unfolding, not erasing America's deep divisions overnight, but creating spaces where healing could begin, where dignity could take flight, with a possibility of a more perfect union remain alive in the courageous choice to see one another across our deepest divides.